Hi everyone. So this recording focuses specifically on qualitative and quantitative approaches. You can also watch this in conjunction with the recording that I will do on choosing your research approach, where there's a little bit more information about this too. So this is one of the fundamental decisions in your research approach. So first of all, if we look at qualitative research. So qualitative research really focuses on the complexity that we have in our contemporary lives. We actually, there are a lot of uncertainties within it, and people often do multiple different kinds of activities and multiple different responses to things. And the example I always give if I was actually in the classroom with students is that mobile media is probably now taking you to another place. It could even be now, as you might be looking at your phone while you're actually listening to this recording. So if you're thinking about the sectors that you're interested in, which is the events, tourism, hospitality and sports sectors, they're all very experiential. They draw on people's emotions. They're quite corporeal. They're things that people do physically in places. And actually, when we look at those experiences, they're going to be very different for different people. And qualitative research is very useful there. I remember years ago, one of the things that really brought home to me the importance of qualitative research was looking at a study by Costa and Chaleb from 2005. And this was an ethnographic study looking at paragliding in Portugal. And one of the things that they observed was that the participants, people taking part in the paragliding event, had quite different understandings of that event compared to the local people. And it was only really came out through doing qualitative research did they understand this. And what it helped them do was to understand that there were quite significant tensions between local people and then the population who visited the area to take part in the paragliding events. And that enabled them to actually do some work with the local population to enable local people to understand better what was going on and how they could benefit from this form of event tourism. So one of the things that qualitative research, uses is it uses tools that enable you to understand in a lot more depth what's going on. So, typical examples include interviews, participant observations, focus groups. There are others, but those are some of the main ones. And they're classic qualitative research tools. Then if we look at quantitative research is, fundamentally about counting things. So you can quantify a lot of things. In the areas that you're interested in, you can quantify participation rates. So, for example, how many people are taking part in a sport, and you can actually quantify that in relation to things like age, gender, ethnicity, location. So, there's lots of things you can do to quantify participation rates. You can also quantify impacts on society. Now, these might be impacts on social structure. It could be impacts on the environment. These are all impacts on the environment, and you can actually go and measure these things. Similarly, you can measure economic benefits. So, for example, the economic benefits of tourism are quite significant in many countries and regions of the world. And we can also quantify some of the more, internal things like motivations and feelings about satisfaction. And there are questionnaire tools that enable you to measure these kinds of things. So typical things that we might use in quantitative research are surveys, questionnaires, or observations. And actually we have lots of, they're not new nowadays, but what's sort of emerged in recent years is things like mobile technology can actually collect some of these observations for you. So I've got an example here from a project we did back in 2011. So this is when these tools were first coming available. And if you see that in the middle of the mobile phone in the image there, you can see a heat map. And this was basically, we tracked people who were staying at a campsite in Dorset near Bournemouth. And this showed us where they went at different times of the day. And this was actually relayed back to people who were using the smartphone app at the time, so they had an idea of where places were busy and where places were quiet. But it's a way that we can collect data. And the people who were collecting data from, they just had to carry a mobile phone with the research app on it. So there's many areas of debate about quantitative and qualitative research. So, people often argue that quantitative research, fails because actually it doesn't adequately measure things, because actually it's quite difficult to work out what you need to measure. And I often work with students and they do studies, and at the end of the things they say, oh, I wish I'd actually found out the age of my respondents, or now I reflect on this further and I've got my data back, I actually should have asked about X or Y, and that's one of the problems with it. But also, even when you're trying to measure things, it's actually quite complicated to measure some things quantitatively. So I mentioned things like motivations. Yeah, that's quite a tricky thing to measure when you think about it. And then qualitative research, this is often criticised because it doesn't have quite the same rigour. Because it doesn't measure things in the same way, it actually poses more problems when you're trying to look at the relationships between different things. It might build up some understanding of those relationships, but it can't confirm it, and that can be quite problematic. And then at the bottom there, I've said that purists argue that qualitative and quantitative methodologies are incompatible, and that you shouldn't use them, but others sort of say that they actually can be quite useful to be used together. So that's another thing to bear in mind there. So, just a kind of summary there, there is quite a lot of debate if you look at the literature and if you look at the research methods books that I recommend on this topic, regarding the advantages of these different methods. And that's something that you need to have a look at when you're writing up your methodology and your research approach. They can be complementary, but often they're done quite separately. Now, one of the things that I would say here as a word of warning, in dissertations, we generally discourage students from collecting both qualitative and quantitative data, because you will find that it is more than enough work to just collect qualitative data, or it's more than enough work just to collect quantitative data. If you try to do both, even if it might seem appropriate for your study, you are likely to fail. And it is not a good move. It is far, far better for you to choose one strategy and do it well. And then maybe in your conclusion indicate that, a good route for further research would be to follow up, say, a qualitative study with some quantitative research, so that now you've developed a conceptual framework that could be tested out in the quantitative research. So don't kind of get overexcited and think, I want to do a really good job here, I'll do both. One, both might not be appropriate for your study, and two, you are likely to do very badly if you attempt to do both. Now, that said, there can be occasions when students do both, but it's usually when one of them is a very small element, maybe doing a quantitative study just to map something out, which is then used to inform the much larger qualitative study. Okay, so just be a bit careful there. And above all, I've said at the bottom in capitals, you must select approaches that are appropriate to your topic. So if your topic is screaming the need for a qualitative study and you do a quantitative study, that's going to be quite hard to justify, and vice versa. So go and have a good read around using these different approaches now.